I would now like to introduce Karthik, partner in global sourcing at Everest Group. Take it away, Karthik.
Thank you, and good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on which part of the world you're joining in from. Welcome to another of our Everest Group webinars. In today's webinar, we have a pretty exciting theme. I'm sure this is something that's of paramount importance to all global services executives, whether they are from enterprises, GIC, shared services, or third-party service providers. So I'm a partner with Everest Group, and I lead our global sourcing practice, have a global leadership responsibility for this practice. I'm joined by three eminent industry leaders, Benedict, David, and Chris, and I'm going to request them to briefly introduce themselves before we proceed with this webinar. Benedict, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Karthik, and welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here and have this interesting discussion with everybody. My responsibility is with Accenture, operations delivery for Philippines, China, Malaysia, and Japan. The second hat that I wear for this particular discussion is one of the leaders in the Philippines Sourcing Industry Trade Association. So looking forward to our discussion.
Hi, this is David Palmieri from Experian. I'm head of Global Delivery Center Operations, as well as our digital transformation strategy. Our GDCs are based in locations like Costa Rica, Chile, Bulgaria, and Malaysia.
Good morning, everyone. Chris Rogers. I'm the head of facilitated services and transformation for Standard Chartered's Global Business Services. I've spent the last 20 years building and running GICs across Asia, predominantly in India, where I've spent 11 years, but also Sri Lanka, Malaysia, etc.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Benedict, David, and Chris. Pleasure to have you on the webinar. So moving on with kind of our content today, we're going to have two parts to this webinar. The first, I will share a brief perspective on this topic based on our research and my own personal experience in this space. And then we'll move on to an interactive panel discussion. As you would have noticed, we've got a interesting panel here representing different parts of the global services ecosystem. And we'll be talking on some of these themes and how it impacts their specific organizations and what they see as the road ahead as we progress in this discussion. Okay, can we move on? Okay, so before we get started, a quick question for the audience, and you have the opportunity to cast your vote on this question. I'm sure this is a question that's been talked about day and night in different organizations. What is the expected impact of technology adoption on the number of jobs in global services? And as you can see on your screens, you've got 5 options to choose. And when we say technology adoption here, assume it's the broader impact of digital, right? It'll include automation, cognitive analytics, artificial intelligence, mobility, etc. And I'm sure there are different theories on this topic, so I'd like to see what the audience has to say today on this question. Okay, we'll give it another 5 seconds or so before we close the poll. Okay. Okay, interesting. So the majority of this group believes that there will be an increase in jobs, with over a third saying a significant increase. Having said that, there is also a group in the audience that believes that the impact of jobs will be negative, right? And that's really an interesting segue into the rest of this presentation. let's dwell on this later in the panel discussion. But just to step back and say, okay, why this topic about human plus technology? Right? This has been happening for many years, ever since the inception of global services. But why is there so much emphasis on this topic now? Right? The first is, as there are changing business needs for enterprises, and one key change that enterprises are experiencing is the need for higher customer focus. Okay? What this means is higher customer focus doesn't only mean being responsive to customer needs, but also anticipating what the customer might need before there is a problem. And also, how do you think about integrated customer lifecycle management? And there is an accelerated emphasis on this topic given the changing business needs. Consequently, the power of human plus tech is to drive competitive advantage for companies. Organizations that are able to combine the power of human plus technology, this is now a source of competitive advantage. It's not just about what tools you can implement in service delivery or how you can bring the cost of delivery down, but the role for human plus tech is viewed as transformational and how it can drive competitive advantage. And one important way this can drive competitive advantage is to accelerate the time to market, which can mean shortening time to market from a business perspective, products perspective, services perspective, and of course, using the combining power of human plus tech, it is possible to have much shorter time to market today than what it was, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago. And what all this means also is a better adaptation to the changing environment. And we talked about changing business needs, but there are also significantly changing business environment in terms of regulations. And the use of human plus tech is able to help enterprises adapt better to changing regulations. Now, with that context, I believe that the future, we move on to the next slide, is really not about humans versus machines, and it's going to be human plus machines. And if I were to cast my vote on the poll question, I would vote towards some increase in the overall number of jobs as a result of this. I think the key message that I want to leave you all with is that machines will augment work done by humans, and the roles of machines and humans will change going forward. But this story is not about 20-30% of the jobs will get eliminated due to automation. That's just sort of one part of the story. And I think while that will be true, this is going to create a number of analytically oriented jobs, a number of technology oriented jobs with new skills. And the ability to work in collaborations with the machines will be key for employees. So this is not really about technology taking away jobs being done by humans, but how the combined power of human plus machines can add increasing value. We take an example with one of our clients. With a leading insurance major, they were struggling with a typical problem of, the agents were struggling with a typical problem of multiple sources of data, and they had to sift through multiple systems to process, let's say, a complex claim, and it used to take them almost 10 days to process this claim. Now, this company implemented cognitive technology and combination of that plus robotics to help draw data from different sources and present a cohesive picture of data and information to the agents. And guess what? It really helped reduce the claims processing time from 10 days to almost just 1 day. So, and a 90% improvement, that obviously resulted in savings. And it also freed up the human time to do something more value added. And that, I believe, will be the future going forward. So it's not machines versus humans, but it's more humans plus machines. Just moving on, there are some tasks that machines are really good at. For example, requiring processing of vast amounts of data, requiring high level of repetitiveness, precision, memory, recollection tasks. The one that I spoke about, for example, just pulling data from various sources. Automation is going to definitely impact these roles, right? And that's where the decrease in jobs are going to be. But having said that, there are types of tasks which humans are really good at, social, for example, requiring adaptability, creativity. These job roles will evolve even further, and this will require increased human involvement. So it's not as if the human involvement is going to go away. The nature of human involvement is going to change significantly. And as some people in the industry have said, and I believe in that as well, you will reach a stage where just doing data entry becomes a violation of human rights for someone in a global services industry. You will want the workforce to be focused on something more value added, something thinking about what does the data really mean, and how do you drive more customer value as opposed to just processing of data. Just moving on to the next slide. Um, and with that, just wanted to, that is more, setting the stage from my perspective. I'll come back and wrap this up, really saying what does this future really mean for enterprises and what should they need to be thinking about. But at this stage, let me move on to the panel discussion. And if you could move to the next slide, please. Now I talked about types of roles that might diminish in importance due to human plus tech adoption. Chris, I'm going to ask you to chime in here. As you see this, given your vast experience in the financial services industry, what skills or roles do you believe will diminish in importance due to human plus tech adoption? Hey, Chris. Okay. Hey, Chris, do we have you?
Yeah, apologies all. I lost the connection briefly. Sorry, Kartik. So you passed over question 1 to me, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the comments that you made are interesting. Clearly, there have been lots of studies, articles, opinions on how technology developments, which some people have termed the 4th industrial revolution, are going to impact roles. I think given the pace of technological change, clearly there are going to be some significant impacts over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think the pace of that development is increasing exponentially year on year. I think if you look at the financial services sector, which is my background, many years ago we had branches with lots of tellers, transactions were very manually processed, client account applications were paper-based, etc. And of course, all of that has changed over the years with straight-through processing, online self-service, credit scoring, etc. However, whilst a lot of that manual processing, data rekeying, the low-end sort of activity, quality checking, etc., has reduced, we still have many mundane and non-value adding activities that still exist today. I think in an earlier slide you highlighted the type of tasks that machines are good at, and we've seen the growth of automation in those areas over recent years. I think that will continue to increase. But the roles that I see being impacted, and a bit like you, I don't think necessarily it's about roles that disappear, although some will. I think it's about the changing nature of the roles that exist today. But I think that the real roles that will be impacted revolve around those transactional and rules-based activities, so data entry, data reporting, reconciliation in areas such as payments, trade, securities, transaction banking. KYC, client due diligence, financial crime monitoring, where they're very rules-based and potentially lend themselves to more automation. I think client-facing roles, cashiers, telemarketers, telephone operators, although I think the latter will change a little bit as automation evolves to take out more of the transactional calls. And I think on the technology side, some technologies will become obsolete, and things like testing automation will continue. So I think we're talking about roles diminishing or changing. Some will disappear, but I agree with you. I think it's important to recognise that whilst technology may automate, simplify, and improve activities, the nature of the roles that those activities exist in will change, not necessarily be eliminated. And I also think what will happen is, whereas previously that focus has been on the sort of lower end, I think we'll start to see it in the middle office as well as the back office, and maybe even the front office roles, as you know, such as research, risk modeling, product pricing, where automation can help to take out some of the more mundane activities.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Chris. That's very interesting. Benedict, anything that you'd like to add on here from an Accenture perspective, or for that matter, what you
Sure,
see in the context of the
sure.
Philippines more broadly? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just dovetailing to what has already been said. I think when you look at where automation is finding its way, already impacting the work itself, is more, in my view and experience, the back office data processing type of work, the F&A type of work, the insurance processing type of work. And in that particular job category, what you would see is insurance claims processing that could be taking, for example, 17 minutes, involving multiple steps and multiple rules checked by a human person, multiple minutes in terms of picking up data points from different systems and screens, and really just mashing it up to a common screen and a workflow. All of those could be automated, right? That's really an example of how a job that requires 17 minutes to collect data from multiple systems, check out different business rules, can actually be reduced to 2 to 3 minutes. And all of that transactional manual work is now down to, here is the recommended next step. Do you agree? Right? There's some QA and some judgment done by the person, and therefore, you know, the nature of the work has changed, right? The person is still doing claims processing, but you've eliminated, as you said, the rules-based transactional one. That has been the clear opportunity, and that's scaling in terms of penetration. I think my only last commentary is, when you think about customer interaction, or let's say call center, it's a bit more interesting to watch, because the trickiest to actually automate is natural human interaction. And I think what is more interesting to watch in that space, for now at least, is the movement into the channels of contact. As the channels are starting to move towards you know, text-based channels, chats, right? For example, or email, that I think is more interesting to watch, because once you start moving the interaction models more and more to chats and emails and self-service, it lends itself to really more automatability. And the transactions that are probably going to be left in real-time voice interaction, that's probably trickier to replace. And that would typically be your higher touch, right? Higher complexity type of human interactions that are required. So interesting to watch the two spaces, how this is really unraveling. And then maybe the summary point is, in reality, I mean, to me, the question is not much about how many jobs are going to be added or deducted. That's important, but right now I think it's very important to know how is the work itself, the process itself is changing, and therefore what is in the implication for the person that's doing the job. So I'll stop there.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Benedict. David, over to you.
Sure. You know, I think the other panelists cover this topic quite well, but I think, simply put, you know, as we go through and we think about how the process is being re-engineered, how it's being redefined in a lot of ways, we have to spend almost an equal amount of time thinking about what the composition of the roles are, what tasks they actually perform, and how we reposition them to maintain their relevance or increase in relevance as their roles evolve. So there needs to be, and this is part of a broader change management challenge, I think, you know, is looking at it more holistically, not just as the process evolves and becomes automated with various forms of technology, robotics and other, but what does that mean to the people that previously performed that job? How are they reskilled? How are they enabled to continue contributing potentially in a new capacity, but with equal or greater importance than they ever have in the past. So I think in that context, learning and development, HR will become massively important, which is a bit counterintuitive in the context of robotics, that HR becomes even more important. But I really see that evolving at Experian as sort of a key aspect of our transformation strategy.
Okay, thanks. I think all of you talked about what is going to become more important, and David, you touched upon it in the context of upskilling, reskilling. That sets the context for the next question. And before we get there, another poll question for the audience. So if you could move to the next slide with the poll question. And my panelists talked about what skills are going to become more important. I touched upon it a bit earlier as well. And I know some of this could vary depending on which function, which process you're dealing with. But like to get the audience view on which skill will become rather the most increasingly important. So if you were to look at delta relative to today, in which of these 5 skills do you believe the most significant delta in terms of skilling requirements of individuals? We'll just give it about another 5 seconds or so for the audience to poll in their results on this. Okay, interesting. Looks like we have a pretty creative audience today. They've rated, creative thinking as the most important, rather the skill with the most significant delta. We've run this poll in different forums. In some it's more about empathy, like Benedict mentioned, in a contact center environment. So on that note, Chris, let's move on to the next item of the panel discussion. Which skills or roles do you believe will increase in importance? Do you agree with the mood of this audience that says creative thinking is where the most significant delta is going to be, or do you have a different perspective on this?
No, I think there are a couple in that list that are equally important, but I think what we'll see is a move from a sort of transactional workforce with subject matter experts that exist in arguably a less structured way today to a more automated and intelligent workforce supported by better tools and data. So I think what we'll see is something, David's right, I think there'll be a greater emphasis around HR, particularly learning and development, and how we build proper career maps and help people to constantly upskill. And I know we'll come on to that a little bit more in a later question. Clearly, technologies will continue to develop. So, AI development will be a key skill as it is now, but will increase. But also, I think marketing specialists, content designers, UI, UX designers, bot managers, network and systems analysts, data scientists. I think all of these things will that exist today will evolve and become more and more important. I think actually in terms of the client, and you touched on it earlier, I think everything should start with the client. I think we'll see more relationship management roles and driving differentiated service through that. Benedict touched on contact centers and how we're now moving to chat and video banking and other channels, and it will be interesting to see how that evolves. I think analytics will continue to evolve as better data tools come out and help to support better insight. And I think insight will become a more important skill and provision of better MI. But I also think the ways of working will change. And I think Carter, you mentioned agile earlier on. I think as businesses embrace agile, not just in the technology space, but as a way of working across the whole business. And I think you're already seeing that with banks such as ING and ANZ. I think the way of working will change, and I think that will spurn some roles as well. And then lastly, I'll pass over to the other guys. I interestingly picked up a World Economic Forum report dated 2016, which listed the top 10 skills by 2020. And interestingly, and these aren't in any particular order, they were complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, service orientation, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. So very similar in what you listed your 5 out. So I'll stop at that point and pass over to my colleagues.
Okay. Hey, David, would be good to hear your thoughts from experience perspective on this.
Sure. Thanks, Karthik. Yeah, creativity certainly. I think in that context, design thinking as a skill becomes massively important, right? Still maintaining that customer centricity, but complementing it with an ability to execute with the right set of technology as you think about the process transformation that you want to go through. So creativity and design thinking, most definitely. I think strategic thought, where do we want to position ourselves long term? How do we get there over a certain period of time? Collaboration, I think massively important. I think along with that, the ability to work and collaborate virtually, assuming that workforce of the future wise, we're still tapping into talent pools with the best, richest pipeline of talent. Will put us virtually everywhere in every country, not necessarily in offices in all cases. So those skills continue to be hugely relevant, along with what many of us I think are challenged by today is a great change management capability. I think that it's hugely relevant now, and I think that the importance of great change management capability continues to grow alongside of this.
Okay. Hey, Benedict, over to you.
Yeah, two things for me to add. And when I think about teams that we have running our enterprise services or operations, two things that come to mind, which is we need to get better at cracking the code in creating a culture of learning, a culture of curiosity, because a lot of this also requires that our folks are naturally interested in taking up the upskilling opportunities, reading up on their own, connecting with other experts, figuring out how is it I can apply this new tool and technology and improving the work that I do, or at least adapt to it. I kind of feel like there's a lot of intent to deploy learning upskilling opportunities. I do feel and suspect there's a bit of a lag in terms of the broader workforce really just being excited to be upskilling and seeking it out. So I think there's the aspect of the learning culture and curiosity we need to build. The second aspect around the people culture and what's going to be important, right, moving forward, is also this environment of constant change and rotation, whether the nature of work is changing. The tools that I'm using, after 1 to 2 years, we're upskilling again, the kind of technologies we're applying. So the jobs will constantly evolve at a faster pace. We've also had for years now been dramatically automating many of our processes in my own group. And that also means rapidly moving people around, right? Because if you've now had a 30% efficiency on one process, one client, I gotta redeploy some of those folks to other functions or other engagements as well. It does pose us new interesting questions, like when we're trying to now scale our AI ecosystem for the same process I gave as an example, insurance processing, which has the full potential of making 80% of the work AI handled and more efficient. There's a big question now, right? Which is how early do we get to start to map out what are skill sets, those that are not going to be required, right? Can actually start building on so that they can start getting ready, be marketed for those future job openings that we have. So I think it's interesting how much of movement, agility, rotation we're creating because of this. Those are two that I'll call out, Karthik, the learning culture and an environment of agility and rotation that people are just, find as natural, if not exciting.
Yeah, no, very, very relevant points, Benedict, and We'll come back to this in the later part of the panel discussion, and maybe you and others can talk about specific initiatives that you've taken to help your organizations better prepare the workforce for success, right? Because it's not only about technology, there is a lot of change from a cultural perspective, even from a leadership perspective. Now, just moving on to the next question for today. I touched upon in my brief presentation about how an integrated human plus tech solution can lead to superior business outcomes rather than thinking of this as just human or just technology. David, any interesting examples that you'd like to call out from your experience on how you've seen integrated human plus tech, deliver superior business outcomes, customer centricity, competitive advantage, all those good things we spoke about earlier?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Karthik. So I have a couple examples I was planning to share with you. In one case in particular, we had a backlog, right? Keep in mind that Experian has grown through a number of acquisitions over the years, in addition to organic growth. And in acquiring other firms, you pick up an enormous amount of data on customer accounts and things of that sort that need to be integrated and mapped within tools like Salesforce.com and other places. And what we found is that we had a massive backlog of Salesforce.com related activity that needed to be integrated. It was an issue that we had been dealing with for a very long time, and we estimated that it would take someone to work on this continually for 10 years in order to address that backlog, let alone the backlog that would build up behind it as we fix the existing backlog. So by thinking about the process, applying robotics into it, we were able to essentially solve that problem inside of about 9 months. And now it's in a business as usual mode, but we were thrilled with the result of it. And the people that were working on that issue, as we applied robotics into it, they were not only a part of the deployment of the robotics, but they actually led that work as it was executing, and they got a lot of value out of that personally as a learning opportunity. But along the way, also redesigned their role to take on even greater value and greater impact. So going kind of full circle back to our last couple of questions. So by doing that, by solving that problem, we were able to solve not only a sort of an open risk item that we were working on solving. So that was a good business outcome. But the other outcome is that we were able to hold on to terrific talent that we're able to reposition for even better outcomes in the future. So that to me is one example. We have many others related to how we deployed robotics to deliver on SLAs that are client-facing in nature. Everything from reporting to certain outputs that we provide to clients. So really pleased by that. We were able to deploy robotics into our membership process. Basically, again, another client-facing process that we ran, where our clients, so they would renew their software license subscriptions with us, and we were able to take a fairly manual process, deploy robotics into it, and not only did we see a very streamlined renewal process come out of that, but our client net promoter scores actually went up, and they said, hey, Experian is becoming an easier company to do business with. We like this. So it's things like that that build client appreciation, certainly, but what it also serves to do is get people within Experian to really lean into the whole topic of Lean Six Sigma and robotics, and say, okay, this has been demystified for us. We understand the intent. We understand the value that it creates for the business. I have a lot of ideas. So our pipeline around robotics has just, exploded over the past year or so, where we have this we have a new challenge in that how do we manage the pipeline of RPA and RDA opportunities, and because of the results we're seeing, it's now beginning to spur even more interest in AI and even greater forms of automation. So it's little things and stories, as part of a broader change management strategy that really build that swell of interest and optimism that creates even more business value. So those are some of my examples, Karthik.
Interesting. So Benedict, any interesting examples you'd like to call out, especially from a Philippine standpoint on this?
Sure. I think a couple of things we've seen, and actually one comment is across third-party provider space, right? In the old days, when you're looking at make the process more rigorous using operational excellence principles, make sure that you deliver it from the right locations, you might talk about 10, 20%, maybe 30% cost takeout opportunity. Now, when you're now trying to apply digital assets, capability, automation, AI analytics, we've started to see deals wherein people are trying to commit to up to 40 to 50%, right? Cost takeout. So the expected outcome from an efficiency standpoint has become much bolder, given some betting and confidence that these assets are going to create just much more efficiency and cost takeout. The other thing that you typically see where you see these digital capabilities make a real business outcome impact to clients is cash flow or cost of capital. So when you're using analytical tools to do smarter collections, then obviously the direct impact is on cash flow. And you also see wherein we're processing payments to the suppliers of our clients, then you have these smart analytics as to when is it that you're paying too early on time, when is it that you can delay payments. So a lot of these analytics tools and approaches have been enabling us to conserve cash for our clients and therefore reduce their cost of capital. The last three things I'll mention is that there is obviously an improvement in quality because the process is just predictably performed and you're eliminating human error. The other area we've seen this is when you have compliance issues, the robot or the machine will actually just follow the rules. So you actually eliminate potentially compliance. The last thing I'll say is outside of the experience of the customer, which I heard from Chris commenting about the net promoter score, is that in reality, the employees who go through and experience the transform process actually love it. They actually go, I am so glad I don't have to do these mundane, routinary, tedious tasks, and I get to apply my time and talent on more interesting, complex things.
Interesting. So Benedict, on that note, let's move on to the next topic for today. And you touched upon different things that are needed from a workforce standpoint for success. So how can companies better prepare the workforce? And when we say workforce here, maybe you can divide this into, let's say the entry-level workforce, but then also talk about the mid and senior level, and in fact even leadership, because there is an aspect of this about preparing leadership as well for this, and something that they may not have been naturally used to or even anticipated. So do you want to build on this?
Yeah, maybe a couple of points, and then we'll hear from the rest of our distinguished panelists. So one is, as I mentioned a while ago, I think there's a lot of discussion ongoing on jobs that will be created and jobs that will be eliminated, and a lot of debate whether it's a net plus or a net negative. I think that the real task at hand for us as leaders in our enterprises is to really go and define how is the job, how are the processes involved in the job actually changing with application of more technology in it. So when you're thinking about that question, then it makes it a bit more tangible problem outside of let everybody take up a course in analytics. Let everybody or a handful of people take up design thinking. I mean, those seem to be interesting, relevant, broad initiatives, but I think we need to really shift a lot of the focus on that example I've been given, the insurance claims processor. How is the job changing with an AI piece and an RPA piece that is part of the new type of process. So there is something to be said about understanding how the job is changing, and therefore how is the incumbent day-to-day tasks and deliverables changing. And then you define what kind of complementary training you need to bridge potentially any gap, or what kind of new profile are required. The other thing that I think receives a lot of attention, and rightfully so, is that to transform the jobs using technology does require an ecosystem. It does require platforms and specialized roles to make it happen. You can't just buy the tools off the shelf and say it's going to now, you can't just buy technology in a way, right? And just see that it's going to help you transform the processes. So you do need a number of automation experts, you need functional experts or business advisors. So you need a combination of people who are technology savvy and functional process savvy and process transformation savvy. And then once you transform the process and apply technology, there is a maintenance and a constant improvement, tweaking of these tools and robots. You kind of need a robotics workforce management and optimization function in your organization. So there's a lot of these specialized functions that you need to create to be able to do this and sustain it and improve it. And then the ones who are currently doing the process, they themselves, right? We need to understand how to have tangible focus on what they need to be ready for, but you can't do that until you get down to the job in the process level, how it's changing. Let me stop there, Karthik.
Yeah, interesting, Benedict. Chris, how do you see these, manifesting in the context of an organization like, Standard Chartered?
Yeah, I think Benedict made some good points, and I think earlier on one of the options on the second survey was people management. And you asked the question about what does this mean for managers. I think first and foremost, everybody needs a very clear understanding of how things are changing and how they're going to evolve and the pace of that evolution. I think Benedict was sort of making the point, you can't just say, we'll redeploy everybody, we're going to move a square peg and put it into a round hole. You're not going to train a payments processor to become an analyst overnight. So I think one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on at the moment is trying to understand that change, and we're probably less mature than my esteemed colleagues in terms of that robotics journey. But we're trying to understand and we're trying to build that. And one of the things we're focusing on now is how do we build logical career maps so when people join us, they and we and their line manager are working to the same end. That you may join as a payments processor, but within 12 months you'll have moved on to maybe trade services, which is a bit more complex, and then you'll evolve from that into maybe financial crime. So where are the logical career maps? And then back to the sort of management aspect, getting the right behaviors in managers to drive, encourage and motivate their people to move through that. So I think you've got to create this culture of continuous learning, and some of it's self-development, but the organization also has a big part to play. I think we'll come on in a later question to where do government and education agencies sort of fit into that picture as well. But certainly that is taking up a lot of our focus at the moment.
Thanks, Chris. In fact, all of you have talked about different aspects of change management challenges, and that sets the stage for the next discussion. Benedict, you talked about it in the context of a talent standpoint. Chris, you covered it from the perspective of culture, and there was elements of what do you do with the process itself. So, David, I'm going to ask you to comment on what are some of the biggest change management challenges, and how do you deal with it? Because all of these are change management challenges in
Sure.
some ways.
Yeah. So I think the learning and development challenge is probably clearer now, so I won't dive into that again. But I think one of the things that we're focused on is this evolving nature of work. And so under a broad banner of strategic workforce planning, we're really looking at what are the longer term needs of the business, what are those things that can be tackled with various forms of automation? Which are those things that go back to the skills that conversation that we opened up with around, you know, creativity and designing and collaboration and so on. And that work is evolving, to be honest about it. It's something we're focused on. We have a sort of a roadmap that's specific to strategic workforce planning. But that to me is one of the biggest challenges right now, is understanding the future needs of the business. And frankly, whether or not we develop that in-house, right, with some of the repositioning of roles, re-engineering the roles and the content of the roles that we had talked about earlier, versus those that we go to the market for. So it's a build versus buy decision in some cases, and, you know, going outside, whether it's with you know, new hires that we bring in, or whether it's with greater partnerships with you know, other firms in a more strategic way, you know, are things that we're still thinking through. But I think, you know, this concept of strategic workforce planning as a way to really engage the business, understand how their business is evolving, what are the skills that they need, position us well for that human and tech conversation. And so far the dialogue has been terrific. It's gone in directions that, quite honestly, we weren't anticipating. But now that we're sort of on the journey of strategic workforce planning, we're beginning to see how all of these factors sort of fit together within a broader productivity ecosystem. So, okay, great, we're streamlining, we're now applying automation, and we're putting the work in the right location, in some cases using our global delivery centers. So how do you manage that change, and what are the skills that you're going to need in this more productive and scalable work environment, are one of the things that we're still working through. So that's how we're dealing with it, but I'm sure it's not the only way to tackle it. But that's the approach we're on currently.
Interesting. Chris or Benedict, I'm going to request one of you to you know, see if you have any comments on what David said, or any other interesting perspectives on how to deal with change management challenges. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next question in the interest of time.
I can. We both waited. Go ahead,
we both hesitate.
Go.
No, I was just going to say, I think David covered it quite well. I just add one thing. I think, you know, this is where technology may also be an advantage, where we can build proper capability frameworks and matrices, and use that technology to help with that career mapping and development. Sorry, Benedict, over to you.
Oh, we can move on, Karthik. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll move on. So I think many of you touched upon the ecosystem point, and, you know, that brings us to the last question of the panel discussion today. And the ecosystem could mean governments, industry bodies, educational institutions, and they have an important role to play in this evolution. So Benedict, I'm going to start with you first, since you have in addition to your role with Accenture, you play a very active role in the industry bodies in the Philippines, be it IBPAP or the Contact Center Association. So your thoughts on this, and if you can also talk about what the ecosystem has been doing in the Philippines to gear up for this human plus tech era in terms of delivery models.
Sure, Karthik. So I'll pick up two things from a government standpoint, at least in my view and experience. One is the regulatory flexibility and responsiveness, the regulatory environment, because in the Philippines, the educational system is regulated by the government, as with other jurisdictions. And what we need is a set of regulatory rules that allow for the educational institutions to be more agile, to sense and respond to changing market demands. Right now, there is an ability to change what kind of curriculum you're going to be offering, but it's a much more tedious process, a lot of heavy lifting, and sometimes by the time you got approval, it's too late, right? The goalposts have moved again. So the agility that you need to give to educational institutions is very important. The other one that you kind of get some examples is really government can also incentivize this. We have an example in one of our centers in China wherein they do get interestingly, some local government funding to run their AI practice, no? Because the government wants to develop their location as a digital location or a digital city. So interesting, some governments fund that. In the Philippines, there's been some press coverage on our association ask for government funding for upskilling scholarships, right? So if members of the industry want to enroll in courses that are relevant in terms of how the future of work is going to look like, then are they going to get some form of voucher or reimbursement from the government? That model is seriously being considered by the government. We kind of lifted it from what Singapore has already been doing. So in summary, government, I think, has the regulatory flex ability as well as an ability to incentivize and stimulate. I'll do a quick commentary on role of associations, and I'm certainly part of two in the Philippines overseeing IT and BPO. One is there is an opportunity and a responsibility from the industry side to define and quantify what is the market demand. I think in conferences, events, meetings with government and educational institutions, we then to talk in terms of concepts, what kind of skill sets are required, which is all fine. We do need to complement that specifically. Everybody wants to talk about we need more data scientists. Well, if you look at what is being now required by the industry, what quantities are we talking about? And every year, how much of that demand is going to increase? If you click down under the category of data analysts or scientists, what kind of specific skill sets do you need? So I think we need to start really quantifying it, because the reality is it is a market, education is a market-driven business, right? If you actually sell to them, these are the cool, innovative jobs that kids are going to want to put tuition money against, right? Then the schools are going to invest in enabling themselves to offer those courses. So there's some job for us to quantify and define what are these cool new jobs that the educational institutions need to do. The last thing I'll say is that I do think that from experience in the Philippines, there's been enough drum beating in the market about the need to align educational institutions and industry or employers. There's a little bit less on actual heavy lifting work, meaning companies like Accenture and others, we need to really just take our own medicine and say, I have 5 strategic partner schools who I'm co-investing in terms of aligned curriculum for skills of the future. I think there, again, there's a lot of talk, a lot of agreements in meetings, and we need to catch up on real action to make those partnerships actually get executed. That's it,
Hey, thanks, Benedict. Thanks, Benedict. Hey, Chris, do you want to comment on it? I know you've worked across multiple geographies, India, China, Malaysia. So how do you see this role of the ecosystem evolving?
Yeah, again, I agree with Benedict. I think governments have a big part to play. I think corporates have got to get closer with education establishments, and certainly we're doing that in one of our geographies where we are working with a couple of universities, and we've actually helped to write the curriculum around cybersecurity. So I think those kind of partnerships I could see increasing. I think Benedict talked on a lot of the technology skills. I think there are other things that are getting overlooked with the technology drive. So core communication and engagement skills, I think, will take on increasing importance. You touched on this earlier. This human interaction is not going to probably disappear with artificial intelligence. It will potentially increase and enable corporates to differentiate service levels. But actually what we're seeing through the use of technology, certainly in the current workforce, is those skills have diminished somewhat and seem to become less important. So I think there's a part around that as well that we're looking at internally.
Yep. David, anything you'd like to add from your experience on this?
Sure. I think they've covered it quite well. The only thing I would add is I actually see the government agencies as being even more proactive than they've been in the past. They want those ideas, and they want to co-invest with us on anything related to robotics and AI. And they really want to showcase the sort of jobs that are driving that and how great their particular country is at fostering that type of innovation. So they're coming to us, and naturally we're quite receptive to partner with those government agencies.
Okay, good. I think we've had an really interesting panel discussion touching upon many aspects of what integrated human plus tech means for service delivery. So let me wrap up as we get to the closing minutes of this webinar. Just move to the next slide, please. So what does this all mean from global companies? And we've touched upon these themes in different parts, but just want to summarize. The first is on integrating technology with work to augment the workforce and achieving superior business outcomes. And a lot of this will involve rethinking what the work itself is, and consequently, what does workforce planning mean in that context? The second imperative would be on reconstructing human jobs, as Benedict, Chris, and Dave spoke about. What does the role of the human really mean? For example, does the person continue to enter fields on how many times an address if a customer is changed, or does he spend his time thinking about, okay, if the customer's address is changing 5 times in a month, is it really an address change, or is this an indicator of fraud? The third imperative for global companies, and we've touched upon it, is really upskilling, reskilling existing workforce, and fully understood that you can't upskill, reskill everybody. But then, an upskilling, reskilling does not only mean the context of technical skills that Chris spoke about. There are a number of softer skills around problem solving, interaction with stakeholders, creative thinking, which in some ways can be harder to upskill and reskill than just technology or process related upskilling. And as a consequence of that, there is also this thing about upskilling and reskilling the machines themselves. Right? And this is really how AI works on, is really continuous improvement of the technology based on feedback from human counterparts is going to be critical for success. If you move on to the next thing that organization is on, underlying all of this is a very clear change in culture and shift in working norms, right, by leverage of virtual teams. An important aspect here is also about how do you think of career pathing differently, because historically in a lot of services organizations, be it on GICs or in service providers, the growth path has been linked to managing people, right? So you manage 5 versus 500 versus 10,000. In a number of digital skill sets, the growth path is not going to be about number of people you manage, but the impact that you create. So how can organizations think about a culture that can also embrace individual contributors, expertise-driven contributors, in addition to managing large teams, is going to be a critical success factor. And then last but not the least is about recalibrating performance management to ensure leaders and employees are working collaboratively with technology. So the KPIs are not necessarily about, okay, number of FTEs added in the process. It's not about growth. It's not only about utilization, percentage, productivity, accuracy, all of that. But can the metrics be redesigned to be thinking about how working collaboratively with humans and tech can add more value to this organization? So with that, we come to the end of this webinar. I wanted to thank the audience once again. Peter, Colin, any closing remarks from your side before we close the webinar?
No closing remarks. If you want to take us home here, Karthik.
Okay. So any questions you have, and I know you all may have more questions as you reflect on this topic. This deck has the contact information on how you can reach out to us with your questions, and we'd be happy to address them offline. Thanks once again for joining the webinar, and hope you found this interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.